Well, hello again, everyone. I wanted to do this video for a while. I want to rank the Tom Petty studio albums. There's technically there are 16 Tom Petty / Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers albums that came out from the entirety of his career. However, he also put out two albums with his pre-Heartbreakers band called Mudcrutch. He reformed them in the early 2000s. I believe the first one was 2008. And then the second album came out in 2017 and ended up being the last really major recording contributions that he gave before he passed away. So I am going to include those in his Heartbreakers / solo discography, bringing the count of records to 18. So I'm going to go ahead and start ranking. Whoops, dropped one. I apologize for that. I got too excited. So yeah, let me go ahead and get started with the albums. So let me start with number 18. Number 18 was 2010's Mojo Album. This was considered to be a comeback for the Heartbreakers. It had been quite a while since the Heartbreakers reconvened as a band. The Mudcrutch album had come out. Tom was kind of on a lull in terms of writing with the band. And then they came out with Mojo. It was a blues album at heart. And it just, there's some good songs on here. I mean, and let me preface, I don't hate Tom Petty songs. I don't think Tom Petty had a stinker song, to use that word. Even the greatest bands in the world, I mean, the Beatles had some bad songs. The Stones had bad songs. But, Tom Petty, I don't think that he ever made a song that I'm just like, that song, I'm not like that with him. So Mojo, I mean, it had, a couple of my favorites on it are Don't Pull Me Over, which is kind of a reggae, chill out song. The I Should Have Known It is classic Heartbreakers rock and roll. But it's just not, it's one of those albums that it's got its strong points, but the weaker points outweigh the strong. And it's a little long in terms of some of the song lengths. There's 15 tracks. So I'm putting Mojo at number 18. Number 17, The Last DJ, which was the last Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album that came out before Mojo. Like I said, he released a couple albums in between solo and with Mudcrutch. This was put out as kind of a concept album. It was Tom's feelings toward the music industry. So really, like, the first half of the album is kind of a concept. The other half is just good Tom Petty songs. The Last DJ itself, Money Becomes King, Joe, all songs that are really just biting at the music industry. And Tom's always had a history of fighting back with the record labels. Again, it's one of those, another album that again, there are good songs on it, but it's not an album that I guess stands the test of time. I don't know. There's something about it. It's not a fully developed idea as an album. I think it would have been better had all the songs been related to the music industry. But some of the best concept albums stray from the original theme. Number 16, probably Tom Petty's least favorite album that he put out, Echo. And the reason this was one of his least favorites, the band and Tom kind of referred to it as his divorce album. He was divorcing his wife, but we learned later on in his life there was a book that came out by Warren Zevon. Warren Zane. He put out an official biography by Tom Petty, and in it we learned that Tom himself, this was 1999, Tom was struggling with heroin addiction, which you would have had no idea that he was struggling with it. He was able to overcome it, and he had a second career that was strong. The second half of his career was strong. But also during this album, their longtime bassist, Howie Epstein, was struggling with heroin and eventually, didn't make it. Died as a result of heroin. So the band was kind of in a transition mode to look for a new bassist. So again, it's got some good stuff on it. I mean, the song Echo, it's heartbreaking, but I mean, it's beautiful lyrics to it. Room at the Top, that kind of became an unofficial anthem for Tom in his later life. But there's some rockers on it too. Free Girl Now is on it. The only Heartbreaker lead vocal that's not a Tom Petty vocal is on that album. Mike Campbell sings the song I Don't Want to Fight, which is a really good song. It's simple lyrics, kind of bluesy, but it fits. And if you've ever heard Mike, I've talked about his band, the Dirty Knobs, that just released a record last year. He's got a voice that echoes Tom Petty, no pun intended. Kind of got that Gainesville, Florida twang. So Echo is number 16. Again, it's a sad album to an extent. It's long, so that's why it's that low. Next, number 15. Let's go back in time a little bit. 1987's "Let Me Up, I've Had Enough." Really, one of the sole reasons that this is so low is because of the 80s production. I mean, every artist that started that didn't start in the 80s, that kind of had to survive the 80s, had kind of their low point. Again, there's some good stuff on here. Jammin' Me, the opening track's a killer song, co-written by Bob Dylan, who the Heartbreakers had been on tour with. Let me see what else is on there. Mostly it's too 80s in terms of production. It's not one that I reach for. It's one of those that I reach for when I want to listen to Tom Petty. Like I dig into his catalog. I'll put it in just to kind of remind myself what's on it. See if it bursts any inspiration in terms of me liking it more. But it hasn't yet. So that's number 15. Number 14, kind of along the same vein, even though this is, let's see, what year is this? 1982. Tom Petty, Long After Dark. And this was the first album that really had Howie Epstein right there as a full-time member. And you can hear his harmony vocals on this album, and that's kind of what he kind of changed the Heartbreakers sound when he came on board. This has the big hit You Got Lucky on it. It's got Change of Heart, which was also a minor hit. The title track, Straight Into Darkness, is very good. Deliver Me. That's probably my favorite on the album. It's got some great gems on here. It wasn't a hit album in terms of, it didn't produce a bunch of hits. You Got Lucky was a big hit. It's not one of my favorite Tom Petty songs. Again, way too 80s for me. So that's why that one is so low at number 14. All right, number 13. I'm sticking to the 80s. Southern Accents. I think if this album was made either in the late 70s or maybe as one of Tom's later albums in the 2000s even, I think it would have been fantastic if he had gone with his original intent of this album, which was to make a concept album based on life growing up in the South. And being someone who was born in the South, I relate especially to about half of this album kind of fits that mold. But he had other songs that were around at the time. One of them came up later on the second Mudcrutch album, which was called Trailer. Again, it was just released as a B-side. It would have been much better as an album cut, and to remove a couple of these 80s songs. The big hit on this album was Don't Come Around Here No More. The Alice in Wonderland music video that was huge at the time. And this was also produced by Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics. And so his fingerprints are all over the 80s style tracks, and I'm not a Eurythmics fan at all. The song Rebels, which is the opening track, not related to the Confederacy or anything like that. It's more, it's about, you know, growing up and kind of going against society. Um, I mean, it's one of the most beautiful songwriting pieces that Tom Petty ever did. There's a great live version on the live anthology with just him and Benmont Tench on the piano. Um, then the song "Southern Accents" is um, is another great one as well. Excuse me, I mixed those up. "Southern Accents" is the song with just him and Benmont on the piano and some minor background musicianship. "Rebels," there's a great version of just him on guitar, just Tom on guitar. Both of those songs are fantastic. I recommend it, but again, it doesn't fit his original concept, which would have been a better album. All right, number 12. The Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, their sophomore album, "You're Gonna Get It." A couple big hits on this song: "Listen to Her Heart" and "I Need to Know." And "Listen to Her Heart" is kind of it's kind of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. They're still in their Birds phase, like they're still relating back to the music of the '60s that they love so much. My favorite on this album, though, is the ballad "No Second Thoughts," which was done live a few times around this time, and they actually slowed it down and made it kind of a country ballad with lap guitar, steel guitar. It was a good follow up to their debut. Again, there's huge hits. "I Need to Know" and "Listen to Her Heart" were live staples throughout the Heartbreakers' career. So that is coming in at number 12. The reason it's so low is that they hadn't really grown much as a band between their first and second album, so it's kind of sticking to the same formula as their first album. Otherwise, it's a great album. Number 11 was the album "Hypnotic Eye," which was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' final album, unbeknownst to them, back in 2014. This album takes me back to college. I bought this my junior year of college, and I remember specifically listening to it when I finished up my junior year and was driving back home with all my stuff in my car. So a lot of this has to do with personal reasons in terms of why I like it so much. But it was a great album. It's still a great album, much better than Mojo, which was the Heartbreakers album prior to this. It's some great rockers are on here. The opening song, "American Dream," "Plan B," "Forgotten Man," those were big on the Tom Petty radio station. So "Hypnotic Eye," number 11. All right, top 10. Number 10. This one does not get a lot of love in the Heartbreakers community, but I'm going to show it as number 10. It's the Heartbreakers soundtrack to the movie "She's the One." And the reason this album doesn't get a lot of love is because a lot of these songs had already been recorded a couple years prior during the Wildflowers sessions, and the record company didn't want these songs on Wildflowers, was afraid that it was going to be too long of an album, so Tom kind of threw some new songs as well as the Wildflowers throwaways, as well as some a couple of covers are on here. A Lucinda Williams cover and a Beck cover are on here. It's got the songs that were kind of minor hits. "Walls" was a big song, and he actually puts it on here twice as "Walls" parentheses "Circus" and "Walls" number 3. So there were two different takes, completely different arrangements, and they just thought they would both fit on the album, which they do. You don't get tired of listening to it twice. And he does the same thing with another great ballad called "Angel Dream." He puts number 4 and number 2 on here. Again, different arrangements. Again, you don't get tired of hearing it twice. The song "California" that's on here, great, like jangle, it's like jangle acoustic music. Very 60s sounding. Great harmonica in it. Like the covers are a little left to be desired. "Change the Locks," I'm not a big fan of that song, which is, I believe, the Lucinda Williams song. But it's still a great album, in my opinion, and I'm putting it in my top 10. That puts us into number 9, Mudcrutch, the first album. I loved this album when it came out. I was in 8th grade. Maybe I might have just been started in ninth grade. It was 2008, so I was either finished with eighth grade or starting ninth grade. This is one of the neat things about this album that kind of blew me away when I was a kid. It still does. What the notes? There's not really any liner notes in it, but the one note in it that says drums, wires, old friends, etc. Recorded live, vocals, harmony, everything. Arrangements done on studio floor. Made in 10 days, no headphones. Los Angeles in August of '07. A lot of love, enjoy. They did this whole album with no headphones and did it live, just like they would as a garage band doing a summer concert with a garage door open. Again, the song is full of traditional covers, country songs. It opens with the old bluegrass song "Shady Grove." "Scare Easy" was one of the early singles, which was original to the band. "Orphan of the Storm," which came out as response to Hurricane Katrina a few years prior. They do the song "6 Days on the Road." Just a bunch of other. They do the old Birds song, later Birds song, "Lover of the Bayou." This is a really cool album. And with Mudcrutch, you get 3 members of the Heartbreakers as well. You get Tom Petty, Mike Campbell, and Benmont Tench, who are kind of the 3 core members throughout the Heartbreakers' career. I can't say enough about this. Check it out. Mudcrutch, the first album. All right, number 8, the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers debut, self-titled, has the hits "Breakdown" as well as "American Girl." What can be said about those songs in themselves? "American Girl" was the last song that Tom Petty sang before he passed away. The last song he sang live, I should say. And then it's just got great rock and roll in the middle of it, between those 2 songs. The first song is called "Rockin' Around with You," which is just a great opener to their career. And actually, they opened with that song during their final tour. They hadn't played it in several years, so that was really cool that they had brought that song back. So that's number 8. Number 7, another just personal choice because of the personal connection to it. The "Into the Great Wide Open," Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. This was produced by Jeff Lynne of ELO. It was his second time working with Tom Petty. The album prior to this, Jeff worked on, and they try to capture that magic again with this album. Hits include "Learning to Fly," "Into the Great Wide Open," and then it's got some great songs. I think my favorite on here, "The Dark of the Sun" and "All the Wrong Reasons." Just breezy, jangly songs. I've listened to the song 100 times driving back and forth to college. That's why it's up there so high for me. I'm just so familiar with it. All right, number 6, "Wildflowers," which many consider to be Tom Petty's greatest achievement. It was his second solo album, even though most of the Heartbreakers contributed to this, as well as Ringo Starr and Carl Wilson, Carl from the Beach Boys. Some of his final recordings. He died a few years later. I have the box set of this. The box set really made me appreciate it more. It's a long album. It's not for everyone. It's considered by many to be his adult album. He'd grown up. He was in his 40s. Big hits: "Wildflowers," "You Wreck Me," "It's Good to Be King," "Don't Come Around Here," excuse me, "You Don't Know How It Feels." And then just it's a great collection of songs. It's been said a million times. I'm not going to talk about it. "Wildflowers," number 6. Number 5, Mudcrutch 2. As I stated earlier, it's Tom's final recordings. For the most part, he did some minor recording a few years, later in that year. But again, this is Mudcrutch, but they decided to go cleaner in the studio. They didn't rush record this. They're all original songs, and every member has at least one lead vocal on it. And the final song on this album, "Hungry No More," just a beautiful song, and it's kind of a perfect song, if perfect's the right word, to close Tom Petty's career. I really recommend this album, Mudcrutch 2. I can't say enough about it. It's fantastic. All right, I'm into the top four. This is another one I'm not going to talk much about. It was Tom Petty's third album, Damn the Torpedoes, which kind of had the Heartbreakers become their own sound. Their first two albums, you heard those Dylan influences, you heard the Byrds. This album, their songwriting was strong. It's only 9 tracks, but that's all it needs. Almost every song was a hit. Refugee, Here Comes My Girl, Even the Losers, Don't Do Me Like That, What Are You Doing in My Life? I mean, just a great album. Again, what's been said about this album has been said. So that's my number 4. This is probably the big surprise for Tom Petty fans to know that this is my number 3, Highway Companion. Now, I remember when this album came out back in 2006. It was it ended up being his final solo album. Again, produced by Jeff Lynne. Essentially, just like his other solo album with Jeff and Mike. I'm not counting Wildflowers. But almost all the instrumentation is done by the three of them. But it's Tom with a more mature sound to his voice. I mean, it's 2006. Tom was in his late 50s. Saving Grace was a radio hit. This album, one of his last radio hits. Again, this had some other songs that would have fit perfectly on Southern accents, including Down South and This Old Town. Both of them could have been on Southern accents. Just great singing. Square One is a beautiful ballad. Flirting with Time is a killer jangle rocker. Check it out. But like I said, I remember when this came out as a sixth grader, thinking that album cover was so weird because I remember seeing it in stores and having no idea what it was. And then when I finally bought it, back when I was in college, I was like, oh yeah, that's the album with that album cover. So anyway, Highway Companion, number 3. Number 2, Hard Promises, 1981. Tom Petty's 4th album. This was one of those albums where he fought the music industry in terms of the pricing of this album. Eventually won. This is the album that includes the big hit with Stevie Nicks, Insider. It's got hits. The Waiting is the opening song. A Woman in Love. Again, this is another one of those that I listened to over and over and over in college. I was a big Tom Petty fan in college. That's where I got into his deeper cuts. And The Waiting is just such a killer song. It's one of the best album openers ever. Again, I'm not going to go into it again. There are plenty of sites that you can visit to read the history on his legal troubles in that album, but to me, it's a fine Heartbreakers record. And number 1, I've kind of, you're kind of a fool not to pick this as his best. His first solo album, Full Moon Fever. I mentioned it on my top 10 album video a few videos back. I mean, what can be said? Produced by Jeff Lynne. Free Fallin', I Won't Back Down, Running Down a Dream, You're So Bad. Those are all still played. Those are still played on the radio. They do a killer version of the Byrds, Feel a Whole Lot Better. The Apartment Song, which is just a good, blues acoustic song. It's just a solid record all the way around. I listened to it a million times in high school. It really got me into the Tom Petty catalog, other than just his greatest hits. So yeah, that's how I'm going to conclude my top Tom Petty albums list. And let me know what you think. If you're a Tom Petty fan, what are your favorites? And I will look forward to reading the comments. Thank you. Take care.